The evening in Fairview, Connecticut, was calm and breezy, with only the soft rustle of leaves in the trees breaking the silence. Lucas sat under an old oak tree in the local park, his legs stretched out in front of him, the faint scent of grass and earth in the air. He was 16, tall and lean, dressed in a black suit and a crisp white shirt. His posture was casual, the book in his hand absorbing all of his attention as he waited for his younger brother, Ethan, to finish soccer practice. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the field where the other kids played, unaware of the sudden change in the atmosphere. The distant hum of engines reached Lucas's ears, barely noticeable at first, but growing louder by the second. He looked up from his book, squinting as he saw a group of motorcycles roaring down the park's entrance. The sound reverberated in his chest, and his eyes narrowed, instinctively scanning the newcomers. 5 bikers pulled into the parking lot by the soccer field, their leather jackets gleaming in the fading light. The engines sputtered before silence descended over them, their heavy boots clunking on the pavement as they dismounted, the clinking of chains and the low murmur of their voices filling the air. Lucas's heart skipped a beat when the group turned and locked eyes with him. There was an intensity to their gaze that made his skin prickle, though he didn't flinch. His instincts told him this wasn't a random encounter. He had always trusted his gut, and it told him this group wasn't here for anything good. They casually surveyed the park, taking note of the few scattered people, until their eyes rested on Lucas, who was seated alone under the tree. For a moment, time seemed to slow, and he could feel the weight of their scrutiny like a physical presence. Despite the unease in his chest, Lucas didn't move. He kept his attention on his book, trying to remain calm, but his senses were heightened. They were close now, the heavy boots of the bikers crunching on the gravel as they approached. The sound of laughter filled the air, and one of the bikers, a burly man with a scar running down his face, stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Lucas. "Hey, kid," the man called out, his voice gruff, like gravel scraping against stone. "What's a little guy like you doing out here alone?" He looked Lucas up and down, his eyes scanning his clothes, the polished shoes, and the suit. "This park's not exactly for your type. You sure you belong here?" Lucas didn't look up from his book, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. "I'm waiting for my brother," he replied, his voice steady and calm, though inside, his mind was already analyzing every movement, every possible exit. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. "Stay calm. Never show fear. Always be aware of your surroundings." The biker laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed across the park. He took a step closer, crossing the line between curiosity and menace. "Your brother, huh? Funny. You don't look like you belong here at all. You sure you're not lost?" The other bikers began to close in, encircling Lucas in a half circle. Their leather jackets creaked as they moved, the smell of gasoline and sweat hanging in the air. They were sizing him up, and Lucas could feel the tension rising. Despite the rising pressure, Lucas stayed calm, his hands resting calmly on his knees, his eyes never leaving the burly biker who seemed to be the leader of the group. He had been in situations like this before. His mother had taught him well, always keep your head cool. In any situation, stay calm and never show fear. The words came to him as naturally as breathing. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. "Not lost," Lucas said, keeping his voice steady. "Just waiting for my brother. That's all." The burly biker smirked, eyeing Lucas as though he were nothing more than a challenge. He leaned in closer, his breath heavy with the scent of cigarettes. "We'll see about that," he muttered, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Why don't you stand up and tell us what you're really doing here?" Lucas's heart beat steadily. He knew the situation was escalating, but he wasn't about to back down. Not here, not now. The air around them seemed to thicken as the bikers closed in. Lucas could feel the weight of their stares on him, and despite his calm, he couldn't shake the instinctive knowledge that this was no longer just idle intimidation. The leader's voice was low but menacing, like the growl of an animal preparing to strike. "You know," the leader continued, taking another step forward, "it doesn't seem like you fit in here, kid. I think we should teach you a lesson about respect." Lucas's eyes remained steady, locked on the man's face. Respect works both ways, he replied softly, his tone unwavering. He was no longer merely reacting. He was in control of the situation. His mind was calm, his breath steady. The leader laughed again, this time louder, almost as if he was mocking Lucas's composure. The rest of the group joined in, their laughter harsh and threatening. One of the other bikers, a tall man with a thick beard, leaned in, his eyes cold as he scanned Lucas from head to toe. "Looks like you've got some courage, kid," the man said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Too bad you're outnumbered." The bikers closed in tighter, now forming a tight semicircle around Lucas. He could feel the heat of their presence, the overwhelming pressure building. It was clear they weren't interested in a peaceful conversation. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the promise of violence. But Lucas wasn't going to be intimidated. The cold, calculating side of his mind kicked in, analyzing every angle. There were 5 of them, and only one of him. He could hear the low hum of the engines idling nearby, feel the ground beneath him, the weight of his body balanced just right. His hands were resting calmly on his knees, his posture open, but his muscles were coiled, ready to move at a moment's notice. His eyes darted to the exits, the gate near the park entrance, the field in the distance, but neither option was ideal. He would have to stand his ground. He thought about his younger brother, Ethan, still on the soccer field, oblivious to the growing danger. The thought of him made Lucas's jaw tighten. He wasn't going to let these men harm his brother. No way. The burly biker stepped forward, towering over him now, a sneer on his face. "I'm talking to you, kid. You're too soft for this park. Maybe we should show you what happens when you don't know your place." One of the other bikers stepped forward, cracking his knuckles as he smiled. Lucas's pulse quickened slightly, but his body remained still. He didn't move, not yet. Not until they made their move. Then, as if on cue, the group of bikers took another step forward, crowding him further. Lucas knew this was the moment. He could already hear the sound of Ethan's voice calling out in the distance. The burly biker was inches away now, his breath heavy with alcohol and tobacco. The mocking grin on his face deepened as he looked down at Lucas, his stance wide and imposing. "You think you can stand here and act like you own the place, huh?" he sneered. "How about we teach you some manners?" Lucas could feel his heart rate steady. He wasn't scared, not yet. His mind was already calculating every move, measuring the gap between him and the bikers, studying their body language for any sign of an opening. The burly leader towered over him, but Lucas wasn't afraid of the size difference. He'd trained for years with his father in martial arts and self-defense. Every inch of his body was prepared for a fight if it came to that. But the real key was to stay calm, assess the situation, and make sure the first move was his. The bikers around him smirked, sensing Lucas's quiet confidence and misreading it as weakness. They had seen plenty of kids try to stand their ground and fail. They didn't know how wrong they were. "Come on, kid," the burly man taunted again. "You're not going to stand there and do nothing, are you? Show us what you've got." Lucas's eyes locked on the leader, his voice steady as he answered. "I'm not interested in fighting. I'm just waiting for my brother." The words seemed to mock the leader, fueling his anger even further. "You've got a mouth on you. I'll give you that. But now, you're going to pay the price for it." The burly biker lunged forward, his fist raised high, aiming for Lucas's face with the force of a hammer. Lucas didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. With a speed that could only come from years of training, Lucas sidestepped the punch with ease, feeling the rush of air as the biker's fist barely missed his head. The man overbalanced for a moment, stumbling forward, and Lucas seized the opportunity. In one smooth motion, Lucas reached out, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it with practiced precision. The biker grunted, his face contorting in pain as Lucas used his own momentum against him. With a sharp twist, Lucas disarmed him in a fluid motion, sending the biker's hand flying open and sending his weapon, a large metal chain, clattering to the ground. The other 2 bikers, seeing their leader struggling, charged at Lucas with reckless abandon. Lucas was already moving before they could even take another step. He ducked the first punch, a swing aimed at his head, then slid beneath the second biker's strike. In an instant, his knee collided with one man's leg, snapping it at the knee joint, sending the biker crumpling to the ground with a yelp of pain. Before the other biker could react, Lucas spun, his foot sweeping out and connecting with the man's ribs with a brutal kick. The biker's body collapsed onto the grass with a heavy thud, gasping for air, clearly unable to continue the fight. Lucas stood tall, breathing evenly, but his body was alive with the rush of adrenaline. He didn't look at the two men now lying in pain on the ground. He knew they were out of the fight for good. His eyes never left the burly leader, who now stood frozen in place, eyes wide with shock, as his two allies were incapacitated in seconds. The remaining bikers began to hesitate, unsure of how to react to the unexpected turn of events. Lucas didn't give them the chance to regroup. "I told you," he said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "I don't want to fight, but I'll protect my brother." For a brief moment, the world around them seemed to stop. The burly leader took a step back, his fists still clenched but his expression now laced with uncertainty. His pride had been wounded. He was used to being the one who instilled fear, not the one who caused it. Lucas's cool, controlled stance, his calm demeanor in the face of overwhelming odds, had caught him completely off guard. As the standoff continued, the sound of Ethan's voice calling out from the soccer field broke the tension. "Lucas!" he shouted, running towards them. He was still wearing his soccer kit, sweat dripping from his face, unaware of the scene unfolding in front of him. The bikers turned their attention to Ethan, who had just crossed the field and was walking toward the park. Their eyes narrowed as they sized him up, and one of them, a lanky biker with tattoos covering his arms, smirked. "So, this is the little brother," he said, licking his lips. "Looks like he's about to learn a lesson too." Lucas's heart clenched. He could see the way the bikers were eyeing Ethan, their predatory grins widening as they saw an opportunity for more chaos. He couldn't let them hurt him, no matter what. "Stay back, Ethan," Lucas called out, his voice sharp with authority. He took a step forward, his body shifting slightly, his stance now fully defensive. "Get out of here now." But Ethan, who had never seen his brother in this situation, looked confused and a little scared. He didn't understand what was going on or why the bikers were so threatening. "Are you okay, Lucas?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with concern. The leader, sensing an opportunity to intimidate, took a step toward Ethan, a grin on his face as he cracked his knuckles. "How about you come a little closer, kid? We've got some lessons to teach your brother, and you don't want to miss out." That was all it took. In a flash, Lucas closed the distance, his body moving faster than anyone could follow. His eyes blazed with fury as he stepped between Ethan and the advancing biker, pushing his brother behind him. "Not today," Lucas said in a low growl, his voice full of warning. His hands were clenched into fists now, and he was no longer the calm, composed teen under the oak tree. He was a force of nature, calm but ready to fight, focused but fiercely protective. The bikers froze for a moment, their eyes darting between each other. The air was thick with tension. Lucas didn't wait for them to make the first move. With a sudden surge of energy, he was on the offensive. "You stay away from him," he hissed, his words laced with a sharpness that pierced through the heavy air. He moved like a blur, swift and calculated, closing the distance between him and the closest biker in seconds. In an instant, Lucas was already in motion, his body a blur as he launched himself toward the closest biker. The man never saw it coming. Lucas's foot struck with precision, aiming directly for the biker's knee. The force of the kick sent the man sprawling, his knee buckling with a sickening crack. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath and clutching his leg in agony. Before the other bikers could react, Lucas had already moved to the next target. One of them, a tall, wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, rushed toward Lucas, aiming a punch at his face. Lucas's body moved instinctively, ducking under the punch and twisting to the side. In one swift motion, he delivered a powerful spinning kick to the man's ribs. The blow landed with a sickening thud, and the biker crumpled to the ground, gasping for air, unable to get up. The remaining biker, the burly leader, watched in shock as his companions were taken down with ruthless efficiency. His face twisted with fury and disbelief. He had underestimated Lucas, and now he was paying the price. "You think you're some kind of hero, kid?" the burly leader growled, stepping forward, fists clenched. "You're just a punk who doesn't know his place." Lucas didn't flinch. His focus was razor-sharp, his mind calculating each move with precision. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Ethan, for his family, and for the safety of those who mattered. The biker's insults didn't faze him. He wasn't going to back down. "You should have walked away when you had the chance," Lucas replied calmly, his voice steady. The burly leader roared in anger, launching himself at Lucas with a wild charge. His fists swung in wide, brutal arcs, aiming to crush Lucas with sheer force. But Lucas's movements were too fast. He sidestepped with ease, narrowly avoiding each punch. The leader's swings grew more frantic as he missed again and again, growing increasingly desperate. Lucas had trained for moments like this. His father had drilled him for years, teaching him the art of self-defense, the importance of remaining calm, and how to use an opponent's aggression against them. He had never imagined that the lesson would come to life in this way, but the instincts were there, honed over countless hours of practice. With a quick, fluid motion, Lucas ducked under a wild punch and stepped behind the leader, using his momentum against him. He reached up, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back, forcing him to the ground with an expertly executed move. The burly leader cried out in pain as Lucas applied just enough pressure to disable him, leaving the man struggling on the ground, unable to rise. The rest of the crowd, which had gathered at the edges of the park, watched in stunned silence as Lucas easily overpowered the entire group of bikers. They had expected chaos, a fight that would end in the teens' defeat. But what they saw was something entirely different, an unwavering calm, a precise display of skill and control, and an overwhelming sense of justice. Lucas stood over the fallen leader, breathing evenly, his body still poised and ready in case anyone else made a move. "I told you," he said, his voice carrying through the park, "I'm not looking for trouble, but I won't let you hurt my brother." For a moment, everything was still. The bikers, who had once felt invincible, now lay defeated at Lucas's feet. Their pride was shattered, their confidence obliterated. And the crowd, once skeptical, unsure of who would come out on top, now erupted in applause. They had witnessed something extraordinary. But the leader wasn't finished yet. He wasn't the type to back down so easily. With a snarl, he shoved himself up from the ground, his eyes burning with rage. His body was bruised and battered, but his pride was still intact, barely. "You think you've won," he spat, wiping blood from his lip. "You haven't seen anything yet." The bikers who had once been his allies now seemed hesitant to intervene, unwilling to join a fight they had no chance of winning. But the leader was determined. He charged once more at Lucas, his fists raised in an all-out attack, reckless in his fury. The crowd around them parted, giving the two combatants space as the showdown continued. Lucas didn't waste time. As the burly man swung again, Lucas ducked low, evading the punch with ease. The leader's momentum carried him forward, his massive body stumbling as he tried to regain his balance. Lucas moved quickly, striking with precision. He landed a quick jab to the man's solar plexus, a blow that left the leader gasping for air, the fight draining out of him with a single hit. But the leader wasn't done yet. He growled and swung again, throwing a desperate punch with all his remaining strength. Lucas, however, was already behind him. He sidestepped once more, grabbing the biker by the arm and twisting it behind his back in a lock that had the man wincing in pain. The crowd gasped as they saw the situation unfold. Lucas, still in control, and the biker, now struggling helplessly in his grasp. "Had enough?" Lucas asked, his voice calm despite the intensity of the fight. His gaze was fixed on the biker, unwavering and confident. The burly leader grunted, trying to break free, but it was clear that the fight had been taken out of him. His body was exhausted, his muscles aching, and every movement seemed labored. The adrenaline was wearing off, and with it, any hope of victory. With a final, defeated groan, the leader dropped to his knees, his hands held high in surrender. All right, I'm done. Just let me go," he panted, his voice ragged. Lucas took a step back, releasing the hold on the biker. He didn't speak another word. He just turned and walked away, his brother Ethan following closely behind him, both of them leaving the park without another glance back. The crowd slowly began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about what they had just witnessed. The bikers, broken and humiliated, limped to their motorcycles, trying to salvage what little dignity they had left. As Lucas and Ethan made their way out of the park, the weight of the moment began to settle over them. Lucas was proud of himself for protecting his brother, but he knew this wasn't the end of their journey. The world wasn't always fair, and not everyone would understand why he did what he did. But as long as he stood by his family, nothing else mattered. The burly leader staggered back, clutching his chest, gasping for breath as he tried to recover from the brutal strike to his solar plexus. The once fearsome bikers were now a disorganized group, each of them battered and bruised, nursing injuries they never thought they'd suffer. The crowd around them fell silent, still processing what had just happened, their eyes flickering between the fallen bikers and the calm figure of Lucas. "Walk away," Lucas said firmly, his eyes locked on the leader. "This doesn't have to go any further." The leader, winded and humiliated, looked over at his companions. They all exchanged uncertain glances, the swagger they had once carried now reduced to a fragile shell. Slowly, the leader raised his hand in surrender, signaling the retreat. The bikers mumbled curses under their breath as they backed away, their pride shattered by the calm, controlled force that had just taken them down. The sound of motorcycles revving up filled the air as the bikers clambered onto their bikes, one by one, their hands shaking as they fumbled with the ignition. There was no more bravado, no more intimidation. They simply wanted to get out of there as fast as possible, the sting of defeat too fresh to ignore. The crowd, still in shock, started to cheer. Applause rang out from a few people who had witnessed the entire ordeal. But Lucas didn't bask in their praise. He simply stood tall, his gaze unwavering, making sure none of the bikers made any sudden moves. When they finally revved their engines and sped off into the distance, Lucas took a deep breath and relaxed, feeling the weight of the situation lift off his shoulders. Ethan, who had been frozen in place during the entire confrontation, finally exhaled. He looked up at Lucas, his eyes wide with awe and a hint of concern. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice shaky but filled with admiration. Lucas nodded, giving him a reassuring smile. "I'm fine. You don't have to worry." As the two brothers walked away from the park, the crowd slowly began to disperse, still murmuring about what they had witnessed. Some of them exchanged stories about the teen hero who had taken down a gang of bikers without breaking a sweat. Others were just beginning to realize the danger Lucas had faced and how easily things could have gone wrong. Lucas didn't care about the rumors or the whispers. All that mattered was that he had protected his brother. That was enough. The walk home was quiet, the evening air cool as the brothers made their way down the familiar streets of their neighborhood. Ethan kept glancing over at Lucas, his mind still reeling from the events at the park. "Lucas, that was incredible," Ethan said, his voice still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "How did you do that? I mean, they were huge, and you just took them down like it was nothing." Lucas smiled softly, his pace steady as they walked side by side. "It's not about size or strength. It's about knowing what you can do and staying calm when things get crazy." Ethan furrowed his brow, trying to understand. "But how do you know when to act? I mean, what if you'd gotten hurt?" Lucas's smile faded slightly as he thought about his answer. He had been trained for years, but he knew that it wasn't just about physical skill. It was about understanding when to fight and when to walk away. "I knew they weren't looking for a fight. They just wanted to intimidate. But when they started threatening you, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing his brother's words. "But what if they came after us again? What if they bring more bikers?" Lucas's eyes flicked over to him, his tone serious yet comforting. "If that happens, we'll handle it. Together. But the most important thing to remember is that we don't start fights. We just protect ourselves and the people we care about." Ethan nodded, his mind slowly beginning to settle as he absorbed Lucas's wisdom. It was a lot to take in, especially for someone his age, but he was starting to see his older brother in a new light. Lucas wasn't just the older sibling who kept him out of trouble. He was someone who knew how to stand up for what was right, no matter the odds. As they approached their home, Lucas could see their mother waiting on the porch. She was scanning the street, her eyes flicking nervously between the two of them. Lucas's heart sank slightly. He had hoped they would make it back without worrying her, but it was clear she had noticed their late arrival. "Mom's waiting," Ethan said softly, glancing up at Lucas. "Yeah," Lucas replied, his voice softening. "Let's just go inside and explain. She'll be all right." The brothers quickened their pace as they reached the porch, their mother's worried gaze fixed on them. As they climbed the steps, she stood up, her face a mixture of concern and relief. But the moment she saw them, her expression softened slightly. "Where have you two been?" she asked, her voice strained. "I was starting to get worried." "It's late." Lucas opened his mouth to explain, but stopped himself when he saw the worry etched across her face. He didn't want to alarm her more than necessary. He knew his mother had always been protective, and he wasn't sure how she would react to hearing about the bikers. "It's nothing, Mom," Lucas said, trying to keep his tone light. "Just had a little situation at the park. We're fine." Ethan nodded in agreement, though his voice still trembled a little. "Yeah, everything's okay, Mom." But their mother wasn't fooled. She could see the tension in their faces, the way their bodies were still wound tight from the encounter. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning them both for any sign of injury or distress. "What happened, Lucas?" she asked, her voice softer now, a mother's instinct kicking in. "Tell me what happened." Lucas exchanged a brief glance with Ethan, then sighed. He knew he couldn't keep the truth from her forever. "We had a run-in with some bikers," Lucas said, his voice steady. "They threatened us, but I made sure we got out of it without anyone getting hurt." Their mother's eyes widened, her mouth opening in surprise. "You, what?" "Lucas, you shouldn't have." "Mom, it's okay," Lucas interrupted gently. "I handled it. They're gone now." Ethan added quickly, "Lucas took care of it. He didn't let them hurt anyone. Not even me." Their mother's face softened as she reached out to pull them both into a tight embrace. "I'm so glad you're all right," she whispered, her voice full of relief. "But please, don't do anything like that again. Promise me." "I promise, Mom," Lucas said, holding her tightly. "I didn't want to fight, but I couldn't just let them hurt us." His mother nodded, brushing a few stray hairs from his face. "I know. I'm proud of you, Lucas. But please, next time, be careful. You're both so important to me." Lucas nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and love. His mother may have been worried, but she knew he had done what needed to be done. And that, he knew, was what mattered most. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner, Lucas and Ethan sat in the living room. The house was calm, the kind of peace that only came after a storm, and Lucas found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. It felt surreal. What had started as an ordinary Saturday evening had turned into a test of courage, a test of character. He could still feel the sting of the biker's presence, the sharp tension that had hung in the air. But what stood out most in his mind now was his mother's reaction. She hadn't scolded him, though he expected it. She hadn't been angry or upset about the confrontation at the park. Instead, she had been worried, yes, but there had been a deep sense of pride in her voice when she told him how much she appreciated his protecting Ethan. Lucas had been worried that she'd disapprove of his handling of the situation, but her pride outweighed everything else. And that felt right. But still, as he sat there, he could see the concern in her eyes when she'd said, "Don't do that again." She had meant it out of love, and Lucas understood that. Even though he had done what he felt was necessary, he knew his mother would rather he walk away from danger than face it head-on. The next time something like this happened, he promised himself he would be smarter. He would think more carefully. He wasn't invincible, and the last thing he wanted was to put his family in danger. Ethan was sitting beside him, fiddling with the corner of his shirt, still absorbing the day's events. Lucas could tell he had more questions, and he knew it was time to address them. "Hey, you doing okay?" Lucas asked gently, nudging his little brother. Ethan looked up at him, his face still carrying a mix of awe and worry. "Yeah, I guess. It's just, I never thought I'd see something like that. I mean, you really took down those bikers. It was like a movie or something." Lucas chuckled softly. I'm glad you think it was impressive, but the real lesson here is not about fighting. It's about knowing when not to fight and standing your ground when you have to. Ethan nodded, processing Lucas's words. I get it now. You didn't just fight for fun. You did it to protect us. Exactly, Lucas said, giving him a reassuring smile. The real fight is about what you're willing to stand up for, not how hard you can hit. Ethan seemed to absorb that, the fear and awe fading slightly as he understood the deeper meaning behind the day's events. Their mother stepped into the room, her voice soft but carrying that quiet authority only she had. You both okay now? She asked, her gaze softening as she looked from Lucas to Ethan. Yeah, we're fine, Mom, Lucas replied, his tone steady. Just processing, you know? She nodded, sitting down beside them. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, but her presence was enough. She knew the gravity of what had happened and the weight of her son's actions. But she also understood the strength that had come from Lucas in that moment, strength that went far beyond physical ability. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. I know I can't stop you from stepping in when it matters, but I also need you to promise me that you'll always remember why you're doing it, that you won't take unnecessary risks, Lucas. Lucas met her gaze, his eyes softening. I promise, Mom. I'll always think before I act from now on. I won't put us in danger unless it's absolutely necessary. His mother smiled, her expression one of both relief and pride. Good. That's all I ask. Later that night, after they'd all gone to bed, Lucas lay awake in the dark, staring up at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the images of the bikers, the adrenaline still buzzing in his veins. The fight had been quick, but intense. Each punch, each move, had been calculated and precise. He knew his training had played a huge part in it, but it wasn't just the physical fight that had mattered. It was his mind that had made the difference. He had stayed calm, remained centered, and done what he needed to do to protect Ethan. The bikers hadn't been expecting it. They'd assumed he was just some random kid, too weak and too scared to fight back. But Lucas wasn't just a kid. He was someone who had learned that true strength didn't come from how much muscle you had, or how loud you could shout. It came from knowing who you were, what you stood for, and when it was time to act. It was a lesson he'd learned from his mother, who had always taught him that being strong wasn't just about protecting yourself. It was about protecting the ones you loved. And that's what he had done that day. Lucas turned over, glancing at his phone, and saw that it was almost midnight. He let out a quiet sigh, knowing he wouldn't be able to fall asleep just yet. Thoughts kept racing through his mind. Thoughts about the bikers, about the park, about the crowd that had watched him. But most of all, he thought about Ethan and how, for the first time, his younger brother had seen him in a completely different light. Ethan had always looked up to him, but now he understood why. He understood the strength that came from staying calm, even when things seemed out of control. He understood that true courage wasn't in throwing the first punch. It was in standing up for what was right, even when faced with the threat of violence. And as Lucas closed his eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day finally wash over him, he realized that what he had done that day wasn't just about protecting his brother. It was about teaching him something invaluable, something that would stick with Ethan for the rest of his life. Courage is quiet, strength is silent, and standing tall in the face of adversity is what truly defines a person. With that thought in mind, Lucas finally drifted into sleep, feeling a quiet strength in his heart, knowing that no matter what came their way, he would always be ready to protect those he loved. As the days passed, Lucas continued to reflect on that Saturday evening, realizing that the true strength he had shown wasn't just in the fight, but in the quiet resolve that followed. It wasn't about physical prowess or winning a battle. It was about standing firm in his beliefs and protecting the ones he loved, no matter the cost. Ethan, too, carried the lessons from that day with him, his admiration for his older brother growing into a deeper understanding of what it meant to be brave. He knew that the world could be unpredictable, and sometimes, the only way to make it through was to stay calm, stay strong, and do what was right, no matter the odds. Their mother watched as her sons grew stronger, not just in body, but in character. She knew that the lessons they'd learned that day would shape the men they would become. And though she would always worry about them, she found peace in knowing they were prepared, not just for physical challenges, but for the challenges life would inevitably throw their way. In the end, the fight in the park had been more than just a clash of strength. It had been a moment of growth, a moment of understanding. It had taught them all that true courage comes not from the desire to fight, but from the strength to do what's right, even when it's difficult. And for Lucas, Ethan, and their mother, it was a reminder that, together, they could face anything that came their way. Thank you so much for sticking with us through the entire story. We hope you enjoyed the journey and found inspiration in Lucas's courage and the powerful lessons about strength, bravery, and family. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with others who might need a little motivation and inspiration in their lives. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more stories just like this. Thanks again for watching.